All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin, Baruch Hashem, zchus, for another day of Baba Kama together. Beginning by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Teves, Mrs. Selma Woolf, for dedicating all the Shiurim and drushos this month. With immense gratitude for the refuos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the merit of a refuah sheleima for all of those in need, and in the zchus of our brave soldiers, and in the merit Hashem, in the zchus of the safe return of the remaining hostages. We also dedicate as a shir our entire shir of Maseches Baba Kama Le'ili Nishmas Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Yikom Damo. And our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Zevi and Shoshi Daniel, Le'ili Nishmas Zevi's father, Yitzchak Yisrael Ben Rafael Noach Yosef. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the Neshama will have an aliya and the family in Neshama. We will say with that, let us begin with a beautiful and really fascinating daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Zayin 47, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Mem Vav Amud Beis 46b, and we left off at the two dots. The Chin Paras, actually the last two short lines. The Chin Paras should not Ches Hashar. So let's remember again, yesterday we had the really fascinating case of, remember, two cases in Mishnah. Case number one was a shar that went ahead and gored a pregnant para. We find the dead par and the calf. We don't know again, was the cow pregnant at the time of the goring or not. So remember again, this opened up the door. So the Mishnah said that the owner of the shar has to pay chatzi nezek for the par and quarter nezek for the calf. The Gemara then went on to really open our eyes that this is the position of zchus. What does zchus hold? Mammon hamotel b'safik cholkin. When you have doubt about a monetary claim, ultimately again you split it. So therefore we're unsure about the status of the calf, and therefore halacha l'maaseh we split it. It should be chatzi nezek, possibly. Therefore we pay quarter damages. Then remember again, the Mishnah brought up the reverse case. What was the reverse case? A cow that was pregnant goes ahead and gores and kills a shar. Right? So then I will say that after the damage is done, we find the calf, and the calf has given birth. We find the cow, and the cow has given birth. What don't we know? Was the cow pregnant at the time of the damage? So you'll say to yourself, who cares? Well, it matters. Why does it matter? Because the shaila is, if the cow was pregnant at the time of the damage, then what? Then in essence, there were two damagers. There was the cow and the calf. If the cow, however, had given birth before the damage, then there was only one damager, i.e. the cow. So once again, the Mishnah says because we're unsure, therefore again for the cow has to pay, so to speak, chatzi nezek, and ultimately again the calf, so to speak, will pay quarter damages. Now again, remember the other piece just to keep in mind is that the Mishnah told us, remember all of this is reflective of zchus. But of course, there's a whole other school of thought to which we subscribe, the school of the Rabbanon, which says, Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. There is no such concept like this of mammon hamotel b'safik yachloku. Whenever there's doubt, that's fine. Doubt remains, and the burden of proof is upon the extractor to go ahead and prove that he is owed money. Good, but nevertheless, we're continuing in the Mishnah, continuing with the mindset of zchus, of mammon hamotel b'safik yachloku. So incredible. So now, we're picking up with the second case of the Mishnah. So here we go. So remember again, cow goes ahead and gores the shar, right? Kills the shar, does damage to the shar. So the Mishnah paskin that for the cow, the cow has to pay. In this case, the cow is the aggressor. The cow has to pay chatzi nezek, and for the calf, quarter damages. So the Gemara says, chatzi nezek uravia nezek palga nisku debay shlumi kuli niska nechi riva maya vidite. So let me get this straight. If you do the math, I will say that means when the cow does the damage, the cow's going to have to pay half nezek. The calf is going to have to pay quarter damages, which means that halacha l'maisa, you're going to end up paying 3/4 damage for this act of keren tam. But for keren tam, you're only chayiv for what? Chatzi nezek. So I don't understand. In other words, shouldn't liability be capped at half damages? But yet here you have a case where you're paying essentially 3/4 damages. Amr Abaye, so I'll say, here we go. Abaye says, you're right. First white line, Mem Vav is really great Gemara. Amr Abaye, Chatzi Nezek, Echad Me Arba'a Benezek, Uravi Nezek, Echad Mishmar Benezek. Abaye says, you're right. When the Mishnah says that the calf pays half damages, it really means half of what it would normally pay. What's half of what it would normally pay? A quarter. And when it says that the calf pays quarter damages, it means that the calf pays half of what it would normally pay, which is what? An eighth. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. V'i para v'vlad dechad minhu, hachanami dematzi amrle lebal para mimanavshach, chatzi nezek havli. I will say, if we're talking about a case where the calf and the cow are owned by the same person, so let's play this out, right? The cow goes ahead and damages the ox, right? What is the owner of the ox entitled to? What is he entitled to? Chatzi nezek. So if you're the owner of the ox, you're saying, listen, I don't really care. Calf, cow, pay me my half damages. I don't want to deal with a quarter damages from the cow, an eighth damages from the calf. There's a halach of keren tam. Keren tam means animal A damages animal B. Animal A is a tam, it is not a muad. You pay chatzi nezek. Give me my chatzi nezek and let's be done. So I spoiled this a little bit for you yesterday. So according to Abaye Bose, the case of the Mishnah has to be like this. The case of the Mishnah has to be where the cow belongs to one person, but the fetus, the calf, belongs to another person. Now I will say, now the truth is, this is an interesting question in and of itself, because how can you sell a fetus? How can you sell a fetus? In general, we look at a fetus either as a davar shalom bali olam, it's not in existence yet. So because it's not in existence, generally the halacha is you can't go ahead and sell something to someone if it's not in existence. So Rashi, again, we're not going to get into the technicalities of this. I'll just point out an interesting Rashi. Rashi says over here, "V'i para vlad, the para dechad of vlad dechad kidon shemacher lo para chutz me ubra." You could have a case. It's actually interesting. You have a case where, let's say, you sold the cow with the exception of the fetus. So it's actually interesting. So you didn't sell the fetus. So it's a technicality. I'm not selling the fetus. I'm actually selling the cow to another, and I'm withholding the fetus. So technically speaking, that's a case where halacha l'maisa, it's owned by two different people. So the Gemara says as follows. Did I miss something?
It's
okay. Okay. I'm still getting back into this, sorry. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, V'id kadin tave lebal para trila, if halacha l'maisa. If halacha l'maisa, so ultimately, again, the damaged party went ahead and claimed from the para from the beginning, hachanami da'amrle lebal para didach is kasin, havli raya di isle shutfi. So now listen to this. So this is actually fascinating. So the case in question over here is where halacha l'maisa, it turns out that the cow is owned by one person, and ultimately the calf is owned by a different person. And now this cow goes ahead and damages the ox. So now what happens? So we'll say, so this is incredible. So now, the owner of the ox says to the owner of the cow, like para didach is kasanli. So havli raya. Just get elalo tricha de para dechad vlad dechad. Vaches v'i dekadim tavi lebal para trila. Say if the owner of the ox, the damaged party, comes and seeks out the owner of the cow first. Hachenami de amar lebal para didach is kasan havli raya de isle shutfi. So now listen to this. So if the owner of the ox goes to the owner of the cow, he says, listen, your cow damaged my ox, give me chatzi nezek. You want to claim that the cow didn't do the sole damage, that the cow had a partner? Who was the cow's partner in damage? Who was the partner? The calf, the fetus? That's on you. You go and prove that. Ella, the kadim tavle bavlad trila. Rather, it has to be the case in the Mishnah is where the owner of the ox, the damaged party, went and actually approached the owner of the fetus, of the calf first, right? Claiming damages against him. In that case, the owner of the cow could say, Damarle, Galis Adaita de Shutfa Isle. You've clearly proven that halacha l'maisa, you acknowledge that there is a partner in this. So we'll say, so this is very interesting. So in other words, in Abaye's model, this is actually really fascinating. In Abaye's model, the calf and the cow are owned by two different people. So now the cow goes in and damages the ox. The owner of the ox wants to sue for damages. So now in Abaye's model, the Mishnah is dealing like this. If the owner of the ox would go directly to the owner of the cow, he could say, listen, buddy, give me my chatzi nezek. Give me my chatzi nezek. You want to claim that someone else was participatory in the damages, you take that up. That's not on me. That's not on me. Your cow damaged my ox, give me my chatzi nezek. That's it. You want to then sue the owner of the calf for some chilik of those damages, go take care of that, nothing to do with me. The case the Mishnah says Abaye is actually interesting, is where the owner of the ox, the damaged party, went to the owner of the calf. Went to the owner of the calf first. Now the fact that he's going to the owner of the calf, what does that show? What does that show? That shows that he's recognizing that there are two participants in the damage of his ox. Well, once you've done that, then you can no longer claim to collect full chatzi nezek from the owner of the cow, since you've acknowledged that there's another participatory party in all of this. Therefore, Abaye will say that the case in the Mishnah will be where you're going to be able to collect quarter damages from the owner of the cow and eighth damages from the owner of the calf. Okay. Others say, others say, even if the owner of the ox went and claimed damages from the owner of the cow first, nevertheless the owner of the cow could go ahead and kind of put him off by saying, the amarle meida yodi ana the shutfa isli. You know that I have a shutaf, right? You know that at the end of the day, I have a partner, that at the end of the day, there is someone else, ultimately, again, who is participatory in this damage. Okay, so I will say, so this is Abaye's understanding of this case. The Mishnah, Abaye's understanding is where there are two different owners, owner of the cow, owner of the calf, and depending on who the owner of the ox, which is the damaged party in this case, is going ahead and approaching first, will determine the amount of damages that he could collect from each of them. That's Abaye's model. Amar Rava. Rava said, come on. Atu echan me'arba benezek ve'achan mishmona be'eznek katani chatzi nezek u'revi nezek katani. Rava says, Abaye, here's the problem. So we'll say, so in Abaye's model, actually in this case, the owner of the ox will be entitled to go ahead and collect quarter damages from the owner of the cow, and 1/8 of damages from the owner of the calf. Rava says, come on, that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that the owner of the ox, the damaged party, could collect half damages from the owner of the cow, and quarter damages from the owner of the calf. So I don't understand, how are you saying no? It doesn't really mean that. It means quarter and an eighth. That's not what it says. Amar Rava, here we go. The olam, the part of Vlad dechad, in reality, Rava disagrees. Whereas Abaye understands we're talking about a case where the calf and the cow are owned by two different people. Rava says they're owned by the same person. Same person. Vachi kamrinan. Rava say, here's what the Mishnah means to say. Isa lepara. If the cow itself is extant, right? If the cow itself is here, or the owner of the calf is present, so then what's the halacha? Mishtalim chatzi nezek lepmipara. Halacha l'maisa says like this. Here's what the Mishnah is telling you. We'll say we have a pregnant cow that damaged an ox, right? We don't know what's our suffix. Was the cow pregnant at the time of the damage or not? So I will say, here's what we know. We know now that halacha l'maisa, the ox was damaged. The only shaila was the cow pregnant or not? So the Rava says, the Mishnah tells us like this. If the cow is present, right? If the cow is present, then mishtalin chatzi nezek mipara. Then ultimately, again, the damaged party collects chatzi nezek from the cow. Now, say, remember again, chatzi nezek of tam is capped at what? 50% of the value of the damaging animal. So that's what it means. So if the par is present, if the cow is present, no problem. We're just going to collect chatzi nezek from the cow. Top of Mem Zayin. Let's say lepara. Let's say the cow is not there. Let's say the cow is not there. Remember again, you could have a case where halacha l'maisa, after the damage is done, so what happens? So the owner of the cow quickly helps it escape to somewhere else. Let's say the cow is not there. Then what? Then mishtalim revia nezek mivlad. Then we could collect quarter damages from the calf. So Rava says essentially what the Mishnah is telling me is that halacha l'maisa, there are two sources of compensation. Right? Ideally, you're going to collect your chatzi nezek from the par. But if for some reason that's not possible, you have another source of collection, which is quarter damages from the vlad, from the calf. Okay, very interesting. Look at Rashi. Top Rashi, Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Leisei lepara v'tam in mishalim ela migufo v'amar lehavle kuli palga hazeka mivlad diunami Askin bahadi para. The Rav Srili dechad gufahu bavi ke'echan me'ebari ki demafarish b'sefa denolsa mishal leminei riva deniska vidach riva mafsid. So we're going to see over here. We're going to see over here Rava's logic in just a moment. So before we explain that Rashi, so this is Rava's logic. Halacha l'maisa, so halacha l'maisa. If again the power is there, collect chatzi nezek from the power. If the power is not there, quarter damages from the calf. So the Gemara says, "Taima delo yadinan in hava vlad bahada kinagcha I lo hava." Now we'll say, here's what's interesting. The reason why Rava says you only collect quarter damages from the calf is why? Because we don't know, was the cow pregnant with the calf at the time of the damage or not? Watch this. Aval I pshitalan the hava vlad bahada. But if we know for sure that the cow was pregnant with the calf at the time of damage, kinagcha mishtalim kule chatzi nezek mivlad. Wow. Watch this, Rabbi say. So Rava says like this. Let me work backwards. Rava holds that the calf is considered to be uber yerech imo, that a calf is considered to be a part of the mother. And therefore, again, I will say, watch this. If we were to know that the cow was pregnant with the calf at the time of damage, then ultimately, again, the calf is a full partner to damage, which would then mean that even if the cow was not present at the time of compensation, we'd be able to collect complete chatzi nezek from the calf. The only reason Rava's capping damages at quarter damages from the calf is why? Because we don't know, was the cow pregnant with the calf at the time of the damage or not. So we'll say, here how fascinating this is. So let's consolidate just a moment. So Rava disagreeing with Abai, whereas Abai sets up the Mishnah as a case of where the cow is owned by one person and the calf is owned by one person. Rava says no. Cow and calf are owned by the same person. So what does the Mishnah mean when it says that you could collect half damages from the cow and quarter damages from the calf? See, remember again, everyone is agreeing that statement doesn't make sense. Why doesn't that statement make sense? Why not? Because you're never entitled to more than chatzi nezek. So why would you be collecting 3/4 damages? Rabbi says you're right. What it means is like this. You're entitled to chatzi nezek. So now, if at the time when you're coming for collection, the cow is present, you collect your chatzi nezek from the cow, and you're done. What if the cow is not there? Cow is not there, right? The owner of the cow, shuttled it off, whatever, to the Caymans, or to the marsh. It's no longer there. It's no longer there for collection. So now Rava will say, okay, you're entitled to collect from the vlad, from the calf. Technically speaking, how much should you be entitled to collect from the vlad? How much should you be entitled to? Technically, chatzi nezek. Chatzi nezek, why? Because the vlad is considered to be a part of the mother, and therefore it's considered to be a full damager. But because we don't know if the cow was pregnant with the calf at the time of damage or not, therefore again, back to the Mishnah, back to zchus, it's maman hamutal b'safek, it's money shrouded in doubt. And what's halacha with maman hamutal b'safek? Cholkin. Therefore, the most you could collect is quarter damages. Incredible. And the Gemara says, Rabbi L'tamei, Rabbi goes according to you. What's Rabbi's reasoning? Dama Rabba, parashe ziga, Gova mivlada, that if a cow does damage and it's pregnant, you could collect complete damage or chatzi nezek depending on the damage from the calf. My time, what's the reason? Gufahi, because I will say a calf is considered to be part of the body of the mother. In other words, it's considered to be an appendage of the mother. Conversely, by the way, gova shezika, if a chicken does damage, ena gova mebeitzasa, you cannot collect damages from its egg. Why not? My taima. Pirsha ba'amahu. So I will say, as opposed to a fetus, which is considered to be part of the mother, an egg is considered to be a secretion of the animal, something separate and distinct from the mother. So, for example, if a chicken did damage, you could not go ahead and collect damages from the egg. Yet Rava holds that when an animal does damage, you could absolutely collect damages from the fetus, from the calf itself. Incredible, I would say. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa. Now remember, none of this is really halacha l'maisa for us because we reject zchus. We accept the Rabbana. But nevertheless, Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah is quite fascinating, talking about a case where both the cow and the calf are owned by the same person. What the Mishnah means is like this: if the cow is present, collect chatzi nezek from the cow. if the cow is not present, technically speaking, if you knew for sure that the cow was pregnant, you would be able to collect full chatzi nezek from the calf, but because you don't know if the cow was pregnant at the time of damages, therefore, you could only collect quarter damages from the calf. Beautiful. So now we move on to something else. Furthermore, Ein shaman lepara bifnei atzma, or levlad bifnei atzmo, ela shaman levlad al gav para. So we'll say now the Gemara says something very interesting, which is the halacha l'maaseh. Now we're now going back to the first case of where the ox damaged the cow. So as I said, obviously now ox damaged the cow. We need to assess damages. So the Gemara says, in general, when assessing damages, we don't assess the value of the cow by itself and the value of the fetus by itself, but rather we assess them as a unit. What's the value of a cow that's pregnant versus what's the value of a cow that's not pregnant? The difference between those two, that's damages. As opposed to assessing each value independently. So the Gemara says, Ella shaman levlad al gav para. Rather, again, halach l'may. So we go ahead and we assess the value of a pregnant cow as one entity. Why? So the Gemara says, Shem'iyah to Omer Kain, because if you're going to assess the value of the cow by itself and the value of the fetus by itself, the Gemara says, this would unfairly impoverish the damager. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi in just a moment. In Shaman, Rashi says, Arei Shakoi, Shoshanagach HaSapara Ve'pila, In Shaman Kol Echa B'fnei Atzmo, She'olin Demei HaNezek Harbe, Aval Shaman Para Me'uberes Kama Haisi Yafet Chila, Ve'kama Hishava Achshav Im Mesa Im Chaya. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so again, just two different methods of valuation. You might have thought that maybe, again, the way we assess damages is we assess the damages of the cow by itself and the calf by itself. Kamash Malon, we look at them as a unit. Right? A pregnant cow was worth X, and a non-pregnant cow was worth X minus Y. That difference is called damages. And the Gemara says, because if you're going to start assessing each one on their own, that is going to unfairly impoverish the damager. Interesting, I'll say similarly again. If let's say Reuven chopped off the hand of Shimon's Eved, Shabbos says, so how do you go ahead and assess damages? Shabbos says, it's interesting. So you could say, well, maybe we look at how much would a person be willing to pay, or how much would a person be willing to receive in order to have their hand chopped off? Right? There's a price on everything. Right? So how much would a person be willing to go, or actually better stated, how much would a person be willing to accept to have the hand of their Eved chopped off? That's really the better way to say it, right? In other words, there's a value to that. That's not how we assess damages. How do we assess damages? An Eved with a hand is worth X. An Eved without a hand is worth X minus Y. That's called damages. Look at Rashi. Literally, Rashi says we don't evaluate the value of the hand by itself. Lomar, kama adam rotza lito liktoa yad Eved kazeh, devadai haroa avdo shalem ein kotea yadav ela b'damim merubin. So as I say, obviously, if you look at it like this, if you ask a person, you have an Eved, how much money would you be willing to accept to have the hand of your Eved chopped off? That's going to be a much higher price than the difference between an Eved with a hand or an Eved without a hand. So the Gemara is just telling us how we assess damages. Both say same idea. Let's say Reuven damages Shimon's field, right? How do we assess damages? So we look at, let's say for example, Reuven's shar went and ate a row of crops in Shimon's field. So we don't say, well, how much is the row of crops worth? Rather, what do we look at? We look at how much is a field with 10 rows of crops worth versus a field with 9 rows of crops worth. And that's how we assess damages. So we'll say, it's actually very interesting. So all of this is a model, essentially what it's saying is like this. When assessing damages, the way we assess it is halacha l'maisa. We look at what a complete entity is worth versus what an incomplete entity is worth. And the difference between those two is damages. As opposed to looking at the damaged entity in a vacuum, right? What is the value of one row of crops, right? What is the value of the loss of a hand? What is the value of a cow and the fetus independently? Because that would essentially represent a much higher level of damages. So the Gemara says, so I'll say, so here's what's interesting. The reason the Mishnah gives to the basis of these valuations is because otherwise it would create a very unfair burden upon the damager. But the Gemara essentially says, who cares? If that's what damages are, then who cares if it's a lot for the damager? In other words, if you did damage, pay the price. To which the Gemara says, Mishum to Amarle, Para ma'abarta is kasach, para ma'abarta sheminoach. Because I will say the damager can say, look, if I damaged a pregnant par, then that's the value that I should pay for. In other words, we don't start dissecting damages. How much is a regular par? How much is an ubar? Again, for the damager's perspective, you're asking me to pay for what I damaged, which I'm happy to. So I damaged a field with 10 rows, right? One row in a field with 10 rows. I cut off the hand of an eved. So the most basic way to evaluate damages, ultimately, again, is by comparing what a whole item is worth versus now what a deficient item is worth, and make me pay the difference. Okay? Pshita, par dechad vlad dechad. So there was another interesting application over here. Let's say if you have a pregnant cow, right? And ultimately, again, the cow belonged to one person, and the offspring, right, the fetus belonged to someone else. Now what happened? Pitma lebal para. Now let's say the cow gets fat. Right, the cow gets fat. Rashi says over here, pituma, masheshaman osa shahaisi yafa, now the idea over here is, let's say now this pregnant cow gets damaged. So now obviously, again, there's a valuation of the cow, right? We're going to look at how much the cow was worth. So now, interesting what the Gemara is saying is like this is, how do we attribute certain value of the cow? Who does it belong to? So for example, now the cow is pregnant and the cow gets fat. The cow gets fat. Who gets, the value, so to speak, of that extra girth, of that extra weight? So obviously, that goes to the owner of the cow. The Gemara says, on the other hand, nafcha mai. We'll say, what about now nafcha? Nafcha is just like, literally nafcha means like bloating, but it means the cow gets bigger. And we'll say, just by dint of being pregnant, the cow gets bigger. Right, that bigger kite, right? Who gets that appreciation? Right? Is that the owner of the cow or is that the owner of the fetus? So the Gemara says, Papa says it belongs to the owner of the cow. They split it. And the halacha is we split it because, again, it really goes to both. Part of it is due to the pregnancy, and therefore, again, the owner of the fetus should get part of that, and part of that is due to just the cow itself. So ultimately, again, we'll split it. So we'll say, incredible sugya. Again, for us, it's a fascinating intellectual exercise, but at the end of the day, the entire Mishnah, as we spoke about, is predicated on a principle which we reject. Right, because the entire sugya is predicated on the principle of zchus, of maman amoto b'safek cholkin. We reject that principle. Not that we reject. In other words, just to be clear, there are cases where we split things, so we don't reject it in totality, but we reject that financial premise as a concept of conflict resolution in monetary matters. Instead, we accept the principle of the Rabbanon of Amotzi Mechavera Alav Haraya. Incredible. All right, Rabbi say Mishnah. This is really a great Mishnah. Really a great Mishnah. Hakeder shehechnes kederosav lechatza balabais. So watch this. A potter, a guy who makes pots. That's it, right? So Kedar shehechnes kederosav lechatza balabais. So we'll say, let's just go with this. Reuven has pots. Right? Reuven goes ahead and brings those pots into the chutzner of Shimon. Okay, fine. Rabbi say, now, here's the wrinkle. Shelo bershos. Reuven brought this into Shimon's property, and he didn't have Shimon's permission to do so. No rishos. V'shavra behemto shabal abayis. Now watch this. Now, of course, you know where this is going. Now, the animal of Shimon tramples on the pots of Reuven. So what's the halacha? Potter. Shimon's obviously potter. Why is Shimon potter? Again, Reuven brought it in without permission. Vimhuska bahen. Now listen to this. What happens if Shimon's animals stepped on the pots and got injured on the pots? Then what's the halacha? Balakeder is chayiv. Reuven is chayiv. Reuven is chayiv. So we'll say, so this cuts both ways. So number one, Shimon is exempt from any damage that happens to Reuven's pots, because Reuven brought it in without permission. And if ultimately, again, Reuven's pots end up injuring Shimon's animals, Reuven's going to be chayiv because Reuven brought it in without permission. Okay, so pretty straightforward. V'hichnis, we'll say first wide line. V'hichnis b'rshos balabais. I'm sorry, v'hichnis b'rshos. What happens if Reuven brought in the pots, but he had the permission of Shimon? Then what's the halacha? Balachatzer chayiv. Ultimately, again, obviously, if Reuven brought it in with reshus, and then let's say again now Shimon's animals trample the pots, then ultimately again Shimon's going to be chayiv. Shimon's going to be chayiv for that because he gave Reuven reshus to bring in his utensils. I will say, so I just want to point out what's happening over here. There's two things. The first part of this is straightforward and obvious, right? Reuven brings stuff into Shimon's chutzner without Shimon's reshus. So if those items are broken, obviously there's no liability for Shimon. If somehow those items injure Shimon's property, Reuven will have liability. The interesting part is the second part of the statement, which is now Reuven brings it in with reshus. With reshus. So we'll say at this point in time, if Shimon's animals damage it, right, then ultimately again, Shimon's going to be chayiv. What do you see from here? You see from here that when you give someone permission to bring in their property into your property, that there is an assumed responsibility that you, the owner of the property, right, that what we call the balachatzer, is taking for that, right? In other words, so when Shimon says to Reuven, sure, you could bring your pots into my chutzner, that means that Shimon is assuming some level of responsibility. So therefore, again, hechnes pershus balachatzer chayiv. So which is really fascinating. So it's not only permission, but there's an assumption of responsibility. Hold on to this. Hichnes peros of a balabais. Next case. Reuven brings his fruit into the property of Shimon. Right? Shelo b'shos, but Reuven doesn't have permission to do so. Bachlos on behemton shel balabayis. Shimon's animal eats the fruit. Right? Then what's the halacha? Potter. Ultimately, again, Shimon is going to be potter from that. Why? Same case. If Shimon's animals are somehow damaged by the fruit, we'll see exactly what that means. Then ultimately again, balaperos chayiv, Reuven is going to be chayiv because he brought in produce without permission. What happens if halacha l'maisa Reuven brought in the produce to Shimon's field, but he had permission to do so? And then let's say Shimon's animals go ahead and eat the fruit. Ultimately, again, Shimon is going to be responsible. So we'll say same principle. You allow someone to bring their property, into your chutzner. Ultimately, again, that permission comes with some assumed level of responsibility on the part of the Bala Chatzar. Next, Hichnis Shoro the Chatzar Balabayis. So we'll say Reuven brought his animal, his ox, into the Chatzar of Shimon, Shelo Bershos, without Shimon's permission. Amud Beis, V'nagcho Shoro Shabalabayis, and Reuven's ox gores Shimon's ox. Oshenashcho, right? Oshenashcho. I'm sorry, it's the opposite. Shimon's ox gores Reuven's ox. Oshenashcho Kalbo Shabalabayis, or Shimon's dog bites Reuven's ox. What's the halacha? Potter. Ultimately, again, it's potter, right? Why? It's all saying is because Reuven brought it in without reshus. So therefore, again, if Reuven brings in his shar without reshus to Shimon's chatzar, and then Reuven's shar gets damaged, ultimately, again, Shimon is potter. Nagahu shoro shabalabayis chayiv. If halacha l'maisa, Reuven's shar went ahead and gored Shimon's shar, then ultimately, again, Reuven's going to be chayiv. Similarly, again, if Reuven's shar fell into, let's say, the water cistern in Shimon's chatzar and spoiled the water, ultimately, again, so Reuven's going to be chayiv. If, let's say, Reuven's father or son they were swimming in the water, and then what happens? Reuven's shar falls in and chas v'shalom kills them. Ultimately, again, then Reuven's going to have to pay kofar. So both say these are all seemingly illustrations of the same halacha, which is in all of these cases, Reuven is going ahead and bringing in his shar into the chatzar of Shimon without reshus. Reuven is going to be liable and responsible for any damages that occur. However, but let's say again, Reuven went ahead and brought in his shar with reshus, then bala chatzar chayiv. ultimately, again, the owner of the chaser, Shimon, will be responsible for any damages that happen. So I will say, so bottom line is, according to the Tanakama, if you bring, whatever, it doesn't matter, you fill in the blank, you bring in your pots, you bring in your produce, you bring in your animal. If you bring it in without, Reuven brings it in without reshus, Reuven is responsible for anything and everything that happens, and Shimon is not. Reuven has reshus, Shimon, the owner of the chaser, gives Reuven reshus to bring in his produce, his pots, his animal, then I will say with that permission comes an assumed responsibility on the part of Shimon. And therefore, ultimately, again, if something happens to Reuven's animal, produce, pots, Shimon will be responsible. Comes along Rebbe says no. Bekulan eno chayiv ad she'kabal alav lishmar. So both say this is incredible. Comes along Rebbe and Rebbe says you're wrong. Permission to enter does not mean assumption of responsibility. So therefore, Rebbe says like this. In all of these cases, when Shimon says, sure, bring in your produce, right? Bring in your pots, bring in your animal. Shimon is giving Reuven a right of entry. What isn't Shimon doing? Shimon is not assuming any level of responsibility for Reuven's stuff. So Reuven brings in his shar, and Reuven's shar gets gored by Shimon's shar. Shimon's like, I'm so sorry for your loss, but not my problem. Right? Reuven brings in his produce, and Reuven's produce gets consumed by Shimon's shar. So sorry. So I gave you a right to come. You're more than welcome to come in, but I'm not assuming any level of responsibility, ultimately, again, once you come in here. So this is the fundamental machlokes. See, everyone agrees in the first case, where Reuven is entering without permission. Obviously, everyone's going through. You enter without permission, whatever happens is on you. You're damaged or you damage someone else, you bear responsibility. The shaila is what happens when you enter with permission. Tanakama says that when Shimon gives permission comes with assumption of responsibility by Shimon. Rebbe says absolutely not. Permission to enter essentially means what? Enter at your own risk. I assume no responsibility for anything that happens to you or your property while you are on my premises. Incredible. Let's analyze. It says the Gemara, Taimo, the Shalobishos. So the Gemara says as follows. Now remember again, Rashi points out there at time the Shalobishos, Vishumhakim Huska Bahem Balak Derus Chayiv. So we'll say, so remember again. So the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah says that in this first case in the Gemara, where Reuven has pots, right? Reuven brings in his pots without reshus to Shimon's property. Then what happens? Shimon's animal is damaged on Reuven's pots. What's going to be the halacha? Reuven is obligated to pay Shimon damages. So it says the Gemara, Taimad Shelo B'Shus. So the reason why Reuven is responsible is because he entered in without permission. Habirshus lo mechayiv bal kederus beniske behemto de bal chatzer. But yet we can infer from the Mishnah, had Reuven entered in with permission, then again Reuven's animal had been damaged ultimately on his pots, then halacha l'maisa, Reuven would not be chayiv for that. So the Gemara says, "V'lo amrinon kabule kabel bal kederos nitirusa de behemto de bal chatzer." Now, Bosan, here's what's interesting. What you see over here is as follows. From the Mishnah, had Reuven received reshus, right, and ultimately again Shimon's animal been injured on Reuven's pots, Reuven would not be chayiv. So what do you see from here? That ultimately again with reshus, Reuven does not assume responsibility to make sure that his pots don't injure Shimon's animal. So Mani, whose opinion is that? That's Rebbe Hy'd the Amar Kol B'Stama Lo Kabil Alei Nitirusa. That reflects the view of Rebbe, right? Rebbe at the end of the Mishnah. Rebbe holds that in general, any permission, right? Permission to enter does not come with assumed responsibility. Yet, Ema Seifa, Im Hichnis B'Rishos Bal Chaser Chayiv. Look at the end of that case. It says that if halacha l'maisa, Reuven entered with reshus, then ultimately the Bal Chatzar does assume responsibility. Asan Rabbanon do amri b'stama nami kebuli kabel tirusa. That does reflect the view of the Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon hold that whenever there is permission for entry comes with assumed responsibility. Furthermore, look at the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Omer bekulan enu chayiv ad shekabal alav balabayis lishmar. Furthermore, I will say, how does the Mishnah end? The Mishnah ends by explicitly stating the position of Rabbi, The Rebbe says even when there is permission for entry does not automatically mean assumption of responsibility. So therefore, Rabbi said the way the Mishnah is set up is Reisha v'Sefer Rebbe Mitzir Rabbanon. So the way the Mishnah reads, Rabbi says the first case reflects the view of Rebbe. The last case, which is the actual statement of Rebbe, is Rebbe, and the middle of the Mishnah is the Rabbanon. It just doesn't seem to be a fluid way to read the Mishnah, or a seamless way to read the Mishnah. Rabbi Zeri, you're right. Tavra misha shanazu lo shanazu. It must be that halacha l'maisa said that there are different authors for different parts of the Mishnah. Also, the Gemara says, Rabba Amar no, Kula Rabbananhu. That's not true. The entire Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbanon. Ubirshos shmiras kederos kibel alav bal chaser ba'afilu nishbar ruchol. So both say it must be again that halacha l'maisa. The entire Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbanon. What do the Rabbanon hold? Rabbi say the Rabbanon hold that whenever the bal chaser gives permission, right? Shimon gives permission to Ruvain to enter. Permission to enter also comes with what? Assumed responsibility to safeguard the property of Ruvain as he enters. And in fact, that responsibility to safeguard Rabosai is from everything. Not only from Shimon's property damaging Ruvain, but any damaging force. So essentially what's coming out of it is something really amazing. That when Shimon gives Ruvain permission to enter means I give you permission to enter my property, and I take full responsibility for the safety of your property. For the safety of your property, ultimately, again, for my own property, and from the safety of your property from external forces as well. A wind smashing it. So essentially, I say it sounds like really what's happening over here is that halacha l'maisa, when, according to the Rabbanon, when Shimon gives Ruvain the right to enter, Shimon essentially transitions into the role of a shomer, right? A custodian, ultimately, again, over the property of Shimon, which is a pretty dramatic transition to make. Okay, let's go weiter. So again, we now see this fundamental tension between the Rabbanon and Rebbe. Rebbe saying permission to come in means what? That's all. Permission to come in. No assumption of responsibility on any level. Rabbanon, no. Permission to enter ultimately means permission to enter and assumption of responsibility. Hechnes peiros of l'chatzar balabais. So Moses, remember again next. Ultimately, again, he brought his peiros into the chatzar of the balabais. So Amarav. So Moses, now remember again. Same case in the Mishnah. Reuven brought his produce into Shimon's chatzar. Now remember again. If it was done without rishus, then what's the halacha? Then ultimately, again, let's say Shimon's animal goes ahead and eats the produce. Ultimately, again, Shimon's pater. But if Shimon's animal, let's say, was injured by the produce, ultimately, again, then Ruvain will be chayiv. So we'll say, now watch this. The Gemara tries to clarify that last piece. When does Ruvain have liability if Shimon's animal was injured by Ruvain's fruit? So watch this. So the Gemara says, so Amarav, lo shanu ela shehuchlaka bahen. When do we say ultimately again that if Shimon's animal was damaged by Ruvain's fruit, that Reuven is liable? That's talking about a case we'll say where what? Where Shimon's animal slipped on Reuven's fruit. Right? So Reuven brought in the fruit without rishos. Shimon's animal slips on the fruit. So now the Mishnah says that ultimately again Reuven is going to be liable for damages. Aval, achla patar. I will say, well, watch this. Let's say Reuven brought in the fruit without rishos. Shimon's animal ate the fruit. And Shimon's animal ate a bit too much fruit. And then died. Right? The halacha is, Reuven is going to be pater. Why? My time will say, second while my time, havila shelo tochal. Ultimately, I will say, who says that just because food is in front of you, you have to eat it? You have to eat it. It's a common problem. Right? It's kind of right. I will say, so Lamaisa, who's, in other words, so that already, that level, see, slippage could be considered to be something that is unavoidable. How is that avoidable? We'll say generally, the owner of an animal is conscious about what their animal is eating. Right? Because again, you have to be careful if your animal is not overeating, if your animal is not going out and eating the stuff that's wrong, that's bad for it. So therefore, again, it's interesting. So if Shimon's animal slipped on Reuven's produce that was brought in without rishus, then in that case, Reuven's going to be liable. But if Shimon's animal ate Reuven's produce and just ate it to the point that it died, that Reuven is not going to be chayiv. For why? Because the responsibility ultimately to make sure that the animal is not eating too much is a general responsibility that continuously devolves upon Shimon. And therefore, Shimon's failure to monitor the consumption of his animal is not Reuven's fault. Amar Rav Sheshes, Amina, it's pretty wild. So this is Rav. Rav Sheshes says, Amina, Kirayim Shachar Rav Amar Laha Shmaisa. So Rav Sheshes says, I think that when Rav was half asleep, he said this. So I'll say, it's interesting in general. Right? So essentially, what Rav Sheshes is saying is, that makes no sense. And I'll say, so you have to wonder to yourself, why does the Gemara record these type of exchanges? Right? In other words, there's machlokes all the time, right? And machlokes ultimately could just be, Rav Sheshes says, I disagree. Rav, I think you're wrong because there's a brisa. Why does the Gemara record Rav Shesh's sharp rebuke? So I'll say, I think it's to teach us a very important lesson, which is Rav Sheshes is saying, a statement like this was said without proper forethought. And the most dangerous thing in life is talking without thinking about what you're going to say before you say it. Or without contemplating. We'll say, there's nothing more precious in this world than our words. Nothing more precious, right? Words, remember again, when the pasuk says, Vayipach ba'apav ruach chaim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu breathed life into man. So you know what Uncle says? What's life? Ruach mimalala. Speech. Speech is what makes us people. Speech is what distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. Speech is the most precious. There are two things in this world which have speech. The Ribono Shel Olam and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world ba'asara ma'amaros. 10 utterances. There are only two entities in this world that could utter anything. And that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu and man. Speech is what makes us divine, which is why nivul peh, inappropriate, right, using inappropriate language, which is why lashon hara, rechilas, those things which debase the very power of speech, those are sometimes the worst averos because they fundamentally erode the crown jewel of our personalistic holiness. So you'll see this sometimes in the Gemara, where someone will say something, and another opinion will see that it's so foolish. How could you have said such a thing like that they almost take offense to it? You almost see like Rav Sheshes almost getting offended that Rav would have used his koach hadibor, his power of speech, in such a useless way. That's what's going on here. Rabbi saying now, halavai, right? Our useless speech should be like in these kind of things, right? But so when Rav Sheshes hears this, Rav Sheshes, really, Rav, this is how you're using your words. This is how you're talking. This is how you're using the gift of koach hadibur. You must not have been asleep, because if you were conscious, if you were fully conscious and awake, you would have never used your power of speech like this. I will say, how careful we have to be. How careful we have to be with how we go ahead and use our koach hadibur. I will say, I would think that this is probably one of the hardest things today, right? Because you see this all the time, right? People are on WhatsApp chats, right? And somebody posts something. Besides the fact that people should be conscious of what they post in general, no one needs to post everything. But sometimes see this. Somebody posts something, and then what happens? Somebody responds. Like it's almost as if there's like WhatsApp Tourette's, just to get it. Be conscious. A person's on social media. Be conscious. Right? Think a little bit about. Right? Somebody says something, you want to respond. Be conscious. If we could only cultivate a little bit of a thought process before we respond, either digitally or physically, right? How much better off we would be, and how much better off the world would be. So, in any event, so Rav Sheshes says to Rav, no, you cannot have gone ahead. You cannot have gone ahead. Been awake. He says, "This Sanya Hanose Sama was Lifnei Behemas Chavero Partim Dina Lechav Dina Shamayim." Well, listen to this. It's actually an interesting case. If you put poison in front of your friend's animal, what's talacha? You are pater from Dinei Adam. You're right. You're pater in a court of law, but you're chayiv b'dinei Shamayim. So the Gemara says, now, why is that? Sam hamaves hu delo avida da'achla. Because I will say, it's not common for animals to eat poison. So in other words, an animal doesn't eat poison, right? And therefore, again, if the animal does eat poison, that's abnormal. And therefore, again, you're not chayiv in a court of law. Aval peros ta'avida da'achla b'dinei adam nami mechayiv. But fruit, which it is common for an animal to eat, you see from here that what? That if you put out fruit and the animal eats too much to the point that it dies, there is liability for that. So Gemara says, "Va'amai havi shelo tochal." But Rav, if you are right, we should say to the animal, "Don't eat so much. Don't eat." So what do you see? But you see from here that it's common for an animal to eat too much and die. The only case where it's not common is if you put poison in front of the animal. An animal knows better not to eat that. Amri huad dina filu peros nami pater medina adam. It's not true. Even by peros, ultimately, again, the person who puts out the fruit is really going to be exempt from dine adam. Why? Because the owner of the animal is responsible to monitor the consumption. I'm sorry. But say the chiddush over here is that for poison, which an animal doesn't normally eat, you're of course going to be pater medine adam, but you're going to be chayiv medine shamayim. You're going to be chayiv, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The other possibility is sama maves nami vaf rasta dahainu peri. What's the other possibility? The case of the poison could be there's a particular type of vegetation that is considered to be poisonous for animals, but an animal would still eat it. So Allah again, even though it's a form of food, nevertheless one would not be chayiv medine adam, but chayiv medine shamayim. So I'll say bottom line for us is Rav, right? The Mishnah is qualifying the case where Reuven goes ahead and brings in his animal, right? Reuven brings in his animal, and ultimately, without rishos, and the animal goes ahead Reuven brings in his peros, without rishos, and Shimon's animal ends up going ahead and dying as a result of that, of those fruit. So the Mishnah says Reuven is chayiv. Rav comes along and says, 1 second. Reuven's chayiv if Shimon's animal slips on the fruit and dies. But if Shimon's animal overeats and then dies, Reuven is not chayiv for that. Why? Because the responsibility to monitor consumption of an animal is always on the owner. So stop over here for today. Shkoyach.